The episode starts off with a flashback of Michael getting his tattoo. We see that the tattoos read Fitz, Percy, and English, which are all street names that all meet at the prison. We then see the Secret Service meeting Warden Pope in regard to Michael's transfer request out of Fox River State Penitentiary. The vice president was suspicious of how Michael got imprisoned at the same prison where his brother is scheduled to die. So she told Paul and Danny to get Michael transferred out of the prison. Pope says that the prisoners in his prison are his responsibility and that he believes in rehabilitation. Paul hands him a folder that reads Toledo, Henry Pope. This folder shows evidence of Pope having an affair with another woman and fathering a child in Toledo, Ohio. His child died a criminal at the age of 18. Pope's wife does not know of this and he keeps it a secret. Paul threatens to reveal this to his wife if he doesn't transfer Michael out of the prison. We then see Michael in PI cutting a PVC pipe and telling the guard he needs more. This gives him an excuse to go into the shed. Lincoln does the same thing. John says he has a bag of fertilizer inside. He calls over Sucre. They all meet at the shed. Michael then shows John that everyone in this shed is in on the prison escape. John does not agree with the idea. Lincoln then grabs John and says if he touches his brother again, he'll split his wig. John laughs as he realizes they're brothers. Michael then explains that he needs to figure out which street outside the prison they will be taking. English, Fitz, or Percy. Michael says he'll need John's help to figure it out. We then see Michael and Sucre walking back to their cell. The guard stops Sucre and tells Michael the warden wants to talk to him, who's at the cell. The warden asks Michael if there's anything he wants to tell him. Michael sees his toilet leaking and thinks the warden found out he's breaking out of the prison. Michael gets nervous as the toilet continues to leak. The warden gets up and tells Michael he's getting transferred to a different prison. Michael then asks him if he can stay for another 3 weeks. The warden asks why. Michael tells him that Lincoln is getting executed in 3 weeks and that he's his brother. He then explains that he petitioned to be in that prison so he can be near him. The warden says that's not up to him and that he'll be shipping out tomorrow. Michael looks away in shock. We then see the warden looking at the Toledo folder, looking over the newspaper clippings of his son's suicide. He then puts the Bible over it. We then see Lincoln at church, with Michael coming over to him. Lincoln tells him he knows about the transfer, but Michael says he's taking care of it. Lincoln then says his hope is taking away. Michael then has a flashback of when he and his brothers were kids, and when his brother told Michael to have a little faith. This prompts Michael to tell Lincoln to have a little faith, then walks away. We then see Nick and Veronica looking over the CCTV footage of the night Lincoln was framed. They notice that the Terrence Stedman was looking right at the camera. Then they see Lincoln firing the weapon. Nick realizes that when he fired the weapon, there was no recoil. He then realizes that after Lincoln leaves the frame, someone else enters and hides his face, looking as if that was Lincoln. We then see Michael getting his food. John tells him he heard about the transfer. Michael tells him not to believe everything he hears. Michael then tells John he'll need one of his henchmen to get a key from a guard. The key is to unlock the door at the warden's office to give him access to the roof. Michael then approaches Charles and asks him if there's a way to block a transfer order. Charles tells him there are many ways. He then tells him that he can block a transfer order if it violates his constitutional rights due to environmental issues, allergies, religious requirements, etc. He also says he blocked his transfers for 10 years. Michael asks him why he wants to stay at this prison so badly. He tells him because he can't leave his cat behind. We then see Sarah and Katie talking about Michael's transfer. Katie tells him Lincoln is his brother. This surprises her as Michael never told this to her. Captain Bellick then enters the warden's office and hands him Michael's transfer block. We then see Michael explaining to Sucre that even if his transfer appeal is denied, it still takes 30 days to process. Michael then tells Sucre that he needs to get out of the cell. Sucre tells him the lights are all on and that other prisoners will see him climbing through behind the toilet. Michael tells him to hang up the laundry. We then see him unscrewing the toilet as Sucre does the laundry. We then prisoners being escorted from the yard. John tells one of his men which guard to attack and get the keys from. He attacks the guard. We see him grabbing his keys to make an imprint of them. The guard tower personnel shoot at the ground which makes everyone get down. The guards punch the prisoner out and escort him to solitary. John sees the imprint of the key and grabs it. We then see Michael moving his toilet and climbing through behind the wall. He then looks at his tattoo to figure out where to go get familiar with the roof access. He then walks and counts his steps. He stops and climbs up to get to the next floor. He continues to climb up to see where the roof access door is. He sees it. He then tries to get back but one of the prison workers opens the door. Sucre is at the cell, checking to see if the guards are coming. We then see the worker light a cigarette and smoke while Michael holds himself up. Michael's face sweats and we see a sweat drop fall. The worker doesn't notice and walks away. We then see Michael back in the cell, closing his toilet. Then we see John's cellmate make a replica of the key in the cell by melting a toothbrush over it, causing the molten plastic to fill it and harden. We then see Nick visiting one of his expert friends with Veronica. Veronica asks him if he sees anything wrong with the CCTV footage to prove that it's been tampered with. He then notices something when he sees Lincoln firing the gun. He shows him the audio of the gunshot. He explains that noise like that wouldn't die down but be bouncing up and down as it traveled through the garage. He says the sound of the gunshot was not recorded in that room. Veronica asks him if he would testify that in court. He says he will if they get the original copy of the footage. We then see Michael working on the Taj Mahal at the warden's office. The warden then says Michael that it's 5 o'clock and that they should call it a day. Michael says he has to keep holding the ceiling up until the glue hardens. Warden lets him stay to hold up the ceiling. He then thanks him for showing up to help with the Taj Mahal. Once the warden leaves, Michael gets his hand out of the project. He then approached the door to see if the guard would be coming in to check on him. He then sees Officer Patterson flirting with the secretary, which means the coast is clear and that the guard is too busy to check up on him. Michael then closes the door and goes to the other door to see if it's been opened from the other side yet. It hasn't, and he looks at the clock and notices he still has a few more minutes before John unlocks it. We then see the warden come home and greets his wife. She tells him his associates are here. He walks to the other room only to see that's at the Secret Service again. We then see John unlock the door with the maid key. Michael opens the door and leaves the office. We then see him enter the hallway where other prisoners are being escorted back to their cells. Then, we see the warden speaking with the Secret Service. Paul explains to him that he'll lose his wife once she finds out about his fathered child from his affair if he doesn't transfer Michael from the prison. Warden orders him to leave his house. His wife then enters the room but Paul and Danny leave after thanking her for the iced tea. Warden looks stressed so his wife asks if he's alright. He says that he just has a little bit of unfinished work to take care of. We then see him shredding Michael's transfer appeal. Then next morning, we see Lincoln get put in chains while the nurse checks up on him to do a physical. We then see Michael walk back to his cell. He tells Sucre that he's going back in. Sucre tells him head count is in 15 minutes. Michael tells him the less he knows the better. We then see the warden praying. He gets approached by the priest. They talk about his son, Will. He then cried about him, saying he didn't get to tell his wife. We then see Nick and Veronica at the headquarters where evidence is kept. The clerk tells them she can't hand out the original copy of the CCTV footage. She then asks which document they were looking for. Veronica tells her. So the clerk tells them to come with her. She shows her the pipe burst last night and destroyed all the evidence. She says it only happened in this room like a freak accident. Nick and Veronica get suspicious. The cell doors open for head count, and we see Michael is not in the cell. We then see Michael to the roof access door. He gets onto the roof. Captain Bellick is taking count. He gets to Michael's cell. He sees that Michael is not in there. He blows his whistle as he assumes Michael escaped. All the lights turn on and the sirens go off. We see all the guards rushing back and forth. Bellick interrogates Sucre and asks him where Michael is. Officer Patterson radios Captain Bellick and tells him Michael is at the warden's office. Bellick tells him to stop trying to nail the secretary and to check the office. He checks the office and realizes Michael isn't there. He tells him he's gone. Michael stays on the roof and observes that the cops show up on English Street. He then looks and sees the cops show up from Percy Street too. He then looks at Fitz Street and sees the cops don't take the road, which means on the night of the escape, they'll be taking Fitz Street. We then see the warden walk in and asks if Michael ever left. They said no. The warden enters his office and realizes Michael was behind the Taj Mahal. Captain Bellick runs and grabs him and threatens to kill him, asking what he was doing in the warden's office. The warden tells him to release him. Michael tells him the glue wasn't dry and said he was allowed to stay in the office to hold the ceiling. Officer Patterson tells him he must have not seen Michael behind the table. Captain Bellick argues that Michael should have never been out of his cell anyway. The warden tells him Michael isn't their problem anymore and that Michael is going to be transferred the next morning. He then tells the guards to escort Michael back to his cell. Michael begs the warden to only give him 3 weeks. The warden feels guilty. We then see Nick and Veronica returning home. She realizes someone forced their way in. Nick comes to investigate. Veronica realizes the closet was open where they hid the copy of the CCTV footage. She then realizes Nick was the only one that knew where she hid the copy, but she stays quiet. The next morning, we see the cell open. Bellick tells Sucre to go to breakfast while he orders Michael to stay since he's getting transferred. Michael then tells him they were gonna take Fitz Street during the escape because the cops don't come from the road. Bellick comes back and orders Sucre to go. Sucre leaves. We then see Michael getting escorted to the bus. John sees him and asks where he's going. He doesn't answer. He then tells his cellmate to call his wife and get herself and the kids out of the country. Michael then looks over to Lincoln. He whispers "I'm sorry" to him. The warden looks from his office and sees Michael being escorted. He has a change of heart. He walks down and asks what Michael is doing out of his cell. The guard says he's being transferred. The warden tells him Michael filed an appeal explaining he has a medical condition which precludes transfer. Pope tells the guard to get him back to his cell. He then looks over and sees the Secret Service watching them. We then see the warden drive home to his wife to admit to her about his son. We then see the Secret Service calling the vice president and telling her that the transfer did not go through. She reminds them the electric chair is not the only thing to take away a man's life in prison.